Good afternoon from the capital of Saudi Arabia, Riyadh City. On behalf of the National eLearning Center, we welcome you all to this webinar, MOOC for Credit. The objectives of this webinar are the following. First, to explore the roles that universities play in promoting national competitiveness, fulfilling needs in the knowledge economy, and enhancing individual opportunity. Second, to review the latest efforts in evaluating, documenting, and sharing extra-institutional learning by colleges and universities. Third, to discuss the policy landscapes relating to credit evaluation. Fourth, to examine the learning evaluation process from multiple perspectives, including the American Council on Education. Interpretation is available in Arabic for this webinar, and you can activate the interpretation icon at the bottom of this homepage. Now, please allow me to introduce myself as the facilitator of this webinar. I'm Dr.Rami Alsakran, and it's my pleasure to introduce our distinguished speakers. With us in this webinar, Dr. Ted Mitchell, President of American Council of Education. Dr. Mitchell will also be the host for this webinar. And we also have Dr. Paul Leblanc, President of Southern New Hampshire University, and Mr. Jeff Maggioncalda, CEO of Coursera, and Ms. Michele Spires, Assistant Vice President for Learning Evaluation at the American Council of Education. Last but not least, we have Mr. Soares, Chief Learning and Innovation Officer of American Council of Education. Mr. Soares will also be the moderator for this webinar. Now, allow me to hand it in to my colleague, Dr. Ted Mitchell. Dr. Mitchell.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure and honor to be with all of you today, and we're looking forward to this webinar. At the American Council on Education, we have for nearly 50 years now been hard at work in evaluating non-classroom experiences for college credit, and we continue that work today in the explosion of the knowledge economy and the explosion of alternative pathways for learners into the knowledge economy. And so we're privileged to talk today about American Council on Education's experience in evaluating MOOCs and other delivery systems for college credit. I want to pause and say at the very beginning that it's really important to our work, and I understand in the work of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, to make sure that the quality of educational experiences is maintained. And that really is where we see our work at the American Council, as being the quality coordinator for these for MOOCs and other providers, making sure that the institutions of higher education are accepting credit for worthy experiences. We'll talk a little bit about how we do that in just a moment, but I want to once again say what a privilege it is for us to be here and to be involved in these conversations. The boldness that has been exhibited by all of you is really worthy of imitation across the world, and we're pleased and proud to be a small part of the effort that you're undertaking. So thank you again for allowing us to be here, and I will turn this over to my colleague, Soares, who will begin to talk with us about how we do the work that we do, how it fits into the larger landscape of higher education in the US. And our colleagues from Coursera and Southern New Hampshire will then give some real world examples of how this operates. Louis?
Thank you, Ted, and honored to be here this morning. I'm going to share my screen so that we can orient ourselves to the time we'll spend together. Let me go to full screen mode. Stop share. Apologies for the Zoom challenge from the beginning. Here we go. So thank you very much for the kind welcome from our Saudi hosts and from Ted. We'll do some perspectives on institutional learning. We'll spend some time with Dr. Leblanc and Jeff Maggioncalda. Then we'll do an overview of the process that AC uses to look at extra institutional learning, including MOOCs. We'll take a short break to allow folks to collect themselves. Then we'll have a dialogue with the panel about the Saudi Arabian context. Then we'll move to some Q&A and discussion questions. that have been provided for the panel, and then any summary and recommended next steps. We'll cut through that. We're already either on schedule or ahead, so we'll look forward to moving into the perspectives on extra institutional learning. And we're going to begin with Paul, and Dr. Paul Leblanc, and to speak from his experience as a higher education innovator in connecting his institution's learning with learning resources outside of the university. And then we'll go to Jeff. Paul will have 15 minutes, and then Jeff will have 15. So Paul, please welcome to our conversation.
Thank you, Louis, and thank you for including me. I'm honored to be with you all. Had like Jeff, visits to the Kingdom and interacted with colleagues there in higher education, and would echo Ted's comments that there's just sort of wonderful, bold, imaginative things going on. So happy to be in this conversation. I'd like to open the aperture a little bit and talk about a more important recognition, I think, for higher education. And it's one that ACE has long recognized, but I think many of our traditional institutions have not so much, which is that learning takes place everywhere and not just in the classroom. And of course, that sounds commonsensical, and we all know that. None of us stopped learning when we left our universities. However, we're not very good in terms of our learning ecosystem in capturing that learning and giving credit for that learning and recognizing it. And as I said, AC has long recognized this. It's recognition, for example, that people who serve in the military develop really important and valuable workplace skills, workforce skills. Can we capture those? Can we recognize those in some fashion? But I would extend that. The military is sort of an obvious way to think about this, but there's learning that happens when someone works in their family business. If they've been in that business for 20 years, keeping the books, they probably have some pretty strong quantitative skills. Can we capture those in some fashion? If someone has worked in the same company or in government for many years and perhaps didn't have a college education or never completed that degree, they learned a lot along the way. So for us, it's been very interesting to think about an architecture or an ecosystem of learning that not only continues, obviously, to have universities as important providers and certifiers, and I think we should always remember that that's the other function we play. We certify learning so that we give people the credential that means something to the world, but that ecosystem now has to open up. And when I think about the work that Jeff and his team is doing at Coursera, when I think about coding boot camps, when I think about sort of non-traditional providers that are coming into the ecosystem every day, Grow with Google, which works with Coursera, but also many others. We think now of not only a broader array of providers, but a broader array of learning credentials. And I think when we have this conversation, we want to think not only about how do we get people to degrees, which continues to be very important, of course, but how do we think about more granular learning? How do we think about micro-credentials that are stackable, but that are also laser focused on skills that are important in the workforce at the moment? And for us, the architecture of that has been to move towards competency-based education so that we stop thinking about learning as equivalent courses, which is kind of an intermediate layer, but to think about learning as it demonstrates mastery of the actual knowledge and skills that people need to do something. And when we do that, when we move to competency-based architecture, it's not about how you teach, it's not about content, it's about the underlying architecture. Then we can start to have a more productive conversation with employers. It gives us a common language. Employers don't think about courses. They don't think about what course did Louis have. They think about what can Louis do? And does he have the skills I need to do the work that I need him to do for us? So with that common language, we've now been able to map out learning in a very different way. And once you have competencies, it gives you a kind of currency exchange. In other words, if we all are talking about competencies, then I can capture the learning that happens out of Coursera in a workplace, in a family business, in the military, because I have a framework and I have a common language for that. So we've been able, using that approach, to do things like confer college credit, SNHU credit, on training or certifications that people would do through Salesforce, for example, Salesforce Trailhead. We can collaborate with a broader range of partners. We now, we have about 180,000 students enrolled with us. 12% of them now come to us through B2B, through partnerships with employers like Walmart and Disney and Amazon. And the work we do today with them is to recognize the learning that is already under their belt, that they already possess before they take their first course with us. And that, of course, does a number of important things. One is it recognizes learning and validates, makes them feel confident about what they come with, but it also moves them further along the path towards completion and hastens our ability to get them through the system. So I think, we all recognize that the old 4 and 40 model is gone. 4 years of university, 40 years of career. That's kind of hopelessly anachronistic. And we also know that skills now have a much faster expiration date. Skills will time out much more quickly, 3 to 5 years. So even if one doesn't change their job will change out from under them very quickly. So we need a new kind of learning ecosystem that allows people to dip in and out. So I can maybe get my degree, but in 3 years, when I now need to reskill, I can dip into a Coursera certification or a credential that allows me to have that in much faster time. And I think this is one of the most exciting things that are happening. And while it can feel a little bewildering to some of our more traditionally minded colleagues, I think this is an exciting and necessary change that has great implications for the ability to upskill your workforce and also to produce the workforce that your industries need for the coming era. So I'll stop there, Lewis, and I know we want to save some space for conversation. Hand over to Jeff.
Thank you, Paul. Jeff, would you like to share your screen now as you begin your remarks?
Yeah, if you could just stop the sharing and I'll introduce
go.
myself. And then I've got just a few slides, some pictures to talk a little bit about some of the topics that Paul mentioned, which is the way that a platform can help an ecosystem of institutions and individuals in a world that is providing many more ways and more timely ways for institutions to be effective in educating people on a competency basis, and also for individuals to get not only learning opportunities, but also more job opportunities. Because even though technology and globalization can make it more difficult for a learner to keep up with what's happening, it also increasingly is providing more opportunities to learn. And I think really importantly, and this is something I wasn't anticipating would be one of the legacies of COVID, but the closing of campuses really drove a lot of teachers and individuals to experience online learning. And the closure of offices has created a new type of workforce that I believe will be permanent. The ability for people to do jobs remotely will provide not only learning opportunities to folks who never had them before, but it will provide economic opportunity to people who never had them before. Because if the university was not in your city, it was difficult for many to get access to learning. If the jobs were not available in your city, it was difficult to get job opportunities. In a world where the learning can be done online and the work can be done online, everyone has a chance to learn and everyone has a chance to get those better jobs. So I'm very excited about what the future holds. And I'd like to just share a little bit of the story of Coursera and some pictures about the way the ecosystem works, and especially how institutions are collaborating to provide more learning opportunity as well as more economic opportunity. So this is a picture of Andrew Ng and Daphne Koller. These are the two founders of Coursera. And Coursera really started in 2012 as a collaboration between two professors who were teaching a very popular course. It was at Stanford, and it was in machine learning, which is a form of AI, artificial intelligence, that helps build predictive models that are very valuable. And when they put some of their lectures online back in 2012, they saw hundreds of thousands of people from all over the world take these courses. And at the time, it wasn't a business. They were just two professors. And what they wanted to do was to create more equal access to some of the best learning that's available. And now we're just celebrating our 10-year anniversary. We're a B Corporation, which is a public benefit corporation in the US. There's a legal status that a company can play where we are legally bound to represent and look into the interests of not just the shareholders, but also of society as a whole. So we're proud to be a B Corp. We're proud to be founded by two professors. And what started as a collaboration between two individuals has really become a global collaboration of many institutions in many domains. So the two professors from Stanford basically in 2011 brought on 5 other institutions, Yale and Princeton and Penn and Michigan. And that has grown to 175 universities who build online courses, and they put them on Coursera for people all around the world to access. And I'll show you some pictures of what these courses look like. As Paul said, the collaboration then went from a number of universities to include industry providers as well. Companies like Google and Microsoft and AWS and IBM. And so now you have universities, higher education, publishing courses that help everybody learn some of that durable foundational knowledge that's so important in a career. And you have businesses creating content as well. And these are often courses that are much more job and skill aligned, and they complement each other beautifully. Universities are so good at teaching that durable fundamental knowledge that can be transferred from domain to domain. They're not often so good at figuring out exactly what kinds of skills are needed for which kinds of jobs and how do you teach the tools to do those jobs. But that's where we could bring in our industry partners. So today we have 175 universities and 75 industry partners who've authored over 5,000 courses. We have over 100 million individuals from around the world, 80% of whom are from outside the United States, who come to Coursera to get access to this incredible learning. And that's really where the company started. Now, 6 years ago, my predecessor, Rick Levin, who is the president of Yale, was for 20 years, he took Coursera and said, you know, in addition to directly serving individuals, we need to serve institutions as well. And so under Rick's leadership, about 7 years ago, we launched something called Coursera for Business. And Coursera for Business is something that allows any business to basically use these courses offered by these educators to upskill and reskill their employees. And Saudi Aramco is one of our largest customers. The government of Abu Dhabi represents the next type of institution, which is government. So a year after Coursera for Business, we now have over 3,000 businesses using Coursera. We launched Coursera for Government. And that's a version of Coursera for governments to upskill public sector workers as well as do citizen workforce development programs, to give every citizen or whichever population they want to serve, they'll be able to get access to high quality courses to increase the skill capabilities, the competencies that Paul talked about in order to get better opportunities to get better jobs. And then in 2019, we launched what we call Coursera for Campus, because we heard many academic institutions say, hey, you know what? We would like to get access just like we do with textbooks. We don't want to write all the textbooks. We want to get access to good thought that we can use as tools, as courseware for our students. And we would like to get the equivalent of a textbook, but we'd like some online courseware that we can integrate into our classes. And we want this to come from the top professors in the best universities in the world. And so we created a version of Coursera specifically for higher education, where any dean or any university or any faculty member can use courses on Coursera to integrate into their own courses. And today we have over 3,500 academic institutions who are using Coursera for Campus. And so it is a combination of serving the world by serving individuals directly. Today we have over 500,000 learners in Saudi Arabia who are learning on Coursera, and also serving institutions, over 3,000 businesses, 300 governments, and over 3,500 academic institutions. And I mentioned how we extend the educators to learners and the educators to institutions. The next major step will be connecting learners with jobs, with what we call talent pipelines. Because we really think of this as institutional collaboration. I mentioned we offer Coursera for Business. Those are the employers. Coursera for Government, which you see here, and Coursera for Campus. But more than just offering these services directly to each type of institution, the real power comes from when institutions collaborate together. And so now what we have are campuses who are collaborating with employers, where the employers can say to the campus, we're looking for graduates with these types of skills. We're looking for these jobs that we need to fill. And the campus can use Coursera and courses from universities or courses from industry to make sure that they can supplement the curriculum so that their graduates, when they graduate, are specifically capable of taking on specific jobs in a certain employer. That's the blue talent pipeline between a campus and employer. We have governments, including the Abu Dhabi School of Government and the National eLearning Center, with their Future X program. I think is one of the most visionary platforms I have seen in the world, where a government is stepping up and saying, we will provide a national e-learning platform to make sure that our individuals and institutions throughout the kingdom can get access to the best learning at speed and scale to keep up with the kind of changes that we're seeing. So we see governments coordinating with employers to do workforce development, and also governments doing what we're doing today, which is helping to understand how policy might facilitate campuses getting access to this kind of learning. And then you can see that the blue line going from governments to employers are really workforce development programs, which we're seeing increasingly. The Abu Dhabi School of Government was one of our first major institutional clients 3-4 years ago. They started with using Coursera for all their public sector employees. They have just expanded so that the Abu Dhabi School of Government is offering now upskill and workforce development programs to regular citizens in the UAE. And then that final little loop in employers is for employers who are realizing that many of the jobs that are being done in their companies are being retooled and automated. And the people in those jobs often don't have the skills to be redeployed into new jobs that employer needs. And so employers are increasingly creating talent pipelines inside their own companies, where an individual can come to a place like Coursera, reskill themselves at their employee for new jobs and careers within their own employee. And that's that little loop that says a talent pipeline internally can help employers link employees whose jobs might be changing to new careers within that employer. Now, what do we offer? Like what's on this platform that all these universities and institutions have created? Today, we have about 5,300 courses. They're about 10 hours long. You can go online and do these for free, or you can pay a fee. If you want to see the videos, you can do that for free. And we have almost 3,000 of these courses subtitled in Arabic. So we have over 3 million learners in the Middle East taking Arabic language courses. The technology to do translation and transcription is really phenomenal. And so language is becoming a much lower barrier. Some of the most popular courses include Stanford Machine Learning. That was by Andrew Ng back in 2012, and he's updated it continuously since. Yale has a great course called The Science of Wellbeing. UC San Diego has a fantastic course from a neurobiologist called Learning How to Learn. It teaches the student how our brains work and how we can use the knowledge of the way our brains learn to learn more effectively. And that's always a really popular one. You can see here 2.7 million students have taken that course alone. We also have specializations. Our partners will often author series of courses, usually 4 or 5 courses. They often take about 3 to 6 months to finish. On Coursera Retail, someone can subscribe to this for about $49 a month. What's really nice, though, is when an institution uses Coursera, it's free to all of their students. And so one of the very powerful things about working with institutions is it makes that learning far more accessible to the individuals. Some of the most popular specializations include Python for Everybody from the University of Michigan, Deep Learning, which is a neural network methodology for doing machine learning that's very popular and effective. And then Georgia Tech has a very popular specialization called Improve Your English Communication Skills. So it's a range of things from programming to data science to even language skills. We also have, as I mentioned, professional certificates. So Google, Grow with Google, Paul mentioned, they have a great 5-course certificate program to teach people who have no prior work experience how to do IT support. And IBM has a wonderful 4-course series on how to help someone become an entry-level data scientist. Facebook just launched on Coursera a 4-course series to become an entry-level social media marketer. So these don't teach the general education principles that are so effectively taught in universities, but they do teach specific skills to do specific jobs, which increasingly are in very high demand. We also have 38 fully accredited degrees that are offered by universities on Coursera, both bachelor's degrees and master's degrees. One of the more popular master's degrees is a master's from the University of Pennsylvania, Computers and Information Technology. This is fully online. You go through the admissions process at Penn. When you're accepted, you're taught by Penn professors. You're graded by teaching associates at Penn. Your transcripts come from Penn. You graduate from Penn, and that is just as if you were on campus. But you can learn from the professors at Penn fully online. And so when we talk about credit transfers, it's important to know that some of the best universities in the world have been offering fully online degree programs, and they've figured out how to do the admissions, and they've figured out the assessments, and they're actually comfortable granting degrees to people who have never stepped foot on campus, even for an austere institution like University of Pennsylvania. University of Michigan has a master's in public health. University of London has a 3-year online bachelor's in computer science. These are all fully online, fully accredited degree programs that are delivered on Coursera. Now, what's really exciting, and I think that Ted will talk more about this, is what some people call stackability. And Paul mentioned micro-credentials and alternative credentials. I often get asked, oh, is the degree dead? Are the degrees going to get replaced by some of these more industry-specific credentials? My answer is absolutely not. And the reason is because degrees are dynamic. They're changing. And what we're seeing with Coursera for Campus is that universities are integrating micro-credentials into their degree programs. So on Coursera, the bachelor's in computer science actually will award 12 academic credits for anyone who has finished the Google IT support certificate. And today, about 1 million people have taken that Google IT support certificate, and 25% of the learners who are studying in the Bachelor's of Computer Science actually finish that Google certificate. And when they graduate, they will have a Bachelor's of Computer Science and also a professional certificate from Google with a specialization in IT support. And we're seeing this now all around the world with Coursera for Campus. Universities are integrating these professional certificates, and through national policies where there's a rigorous review, as Ted was saying, quality is extremely important, making sure that there's ID verification, making sure that there are rigorous assessments, making sure there's no plagiarism, making sure that there's effective proctoring during the exams, all ensures the integrity of these micro-credentials so that they can actually contribute to the course of learning associated with taking a degree. The final thing I'll mention here in terms of types of content are what we call guided projects. These are hands-on projects. They're very short. They're about 60 minutes long, and they teach somebody how to use a particular software tool to accomplish a task. So some of the most popular guided projects on Coursera are, and it's very basic, spreadsheets for beginners using Google Sheets. Now, not many universities want to create a hands-on project in a lab environment where you can teach someone how to use a spreadsheet, but honestly, many students need to learn these things. And so our most popular guided project is Spreadsheets for Beginners. The next most popular one is a project that teaches you how to use a product called WordPress to build a website, very, very basic sorts of things. The third most popular is using a social media tool to do basically animated images. It's called Canva. And it teaches people how to use Canva in order to do social media marketing. And in a form of stackability, what we do is we pair up these hands-on projects with some of these industry certificates. So that if you're going to do the Facebook social media marketing professional certificate, you can build projects using Canva because that's a tool that many people who do social media marketing use. So it's really an industry certificate to teach you the competencies of the job. It stacks into a college degree. And you also can use guided projects to teach you the tools of the job. And the selection really creates a system that is stackable. Now, today, we are mostly focused when we look at the kinds of courses being taken on domains of business and technology and data science. And it's a very rich ecosystem of content. But what we've really been doing more and more is organizing much of this content by job type. So if you want to do a job in IT support, you can take projects that teaches you the tools of IT support. You can get a professional certificate from Google on IT support. And then that might give you credit, not a full degree, but maybe 10 units of credit towards the bachelor's of IT from a university anywhere in the world, but especially in a given region, say in the kingdom, a university can say, you know, you're getting your degree from our university, but we'll allow you to get some of the credits towards that degree if you choose to earn a professional certificate in IT support or a professional certificate in UX design, for instance. We have a great certificate from Google also in UX design. And so that's kind of how the stackability can contribute to workforce development. And then finally, I just wanted to show you a quick picture for these guided projects, because we're so thrilled with them. So many people, you know, younger people, but also in companies who are having to retool their skills. Very often they have to learn software skills to do that. And we have an environment called Coursera Labs, just to give you a glimpse of the kinds of things that technology can enable in terms of pedagogy. Any Windows software, Linux software, or cloud software can run fully in a student's web browser with no software downloaded, no configuration, no data sets need to be downloaded. And on the right side of the browser, the instructor can use a software tool to show somebody how to build a project. And in the left side of the browser, already automatically set up, is a virtual desktop that's exactly the same as the instructor. So the student can go hands-on, step by step, and use these tools to accomplish a task. And the tool might be something in the domain of IT, or the tool might be something in the domain of data science. But what we've heard from many professors is, I don't want to create all these labs and things. I would love it if, just like a workbook, I can add these digital labs in order to help, say, a students in my computer science course learn how to use VS Code from Microsoft, or RStudio, which is a very popular data science tool. I don't want to have to build all those labs myself. I'll just grab a lab from Coursera and it'll complement the data science course that I'm taking. So I apologize if that was a little bit of a long overview, but it's incredible the dynamism that's happening today and the incredible innovation that's happening. And I really salute what's happening at the National eLearning Center of Saudi Arabia. I really truly think that, as far as I can see with respect to countries, this is one of the most innovative visions that is also grounded in practical reality. I mean, it's not like it's just a dream. This is happening today. It's just that very few government institutions collaborating with higher education systems are taking a coordinated approach to deliver these kinds of cutting edge benefits to their students. So we are thrilled to be a part of it. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Jeff and Paul. Paul, I wanted to give you a chance to reflect on, you said at this really high contextual level for what's happening with learning. We'll revisit that a little bit later. And then also the leadership role that higher education can play. Jeff laid out some really interesting value propositions, and also gave us a sense of the ubiquity. How do leaders make sense of this? And then once Paul has a chance, I want to give Ted a chance to step in as well and provide some additional comments. So Paul, go, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Louis, as I think about the work we do with ACE, and I think about our colleagues who are trying to navigate really, you know, a very rapidly changing context, one of the things that they come up again and again, and this, I'm not talking about some incumbent higher education. I think that's where your question, like if you're a leader of a university today, a traditional university, how do you think about that? So Jeff pointed, I think, strongly in one direction, which is find ways to partner and collaborate, right? Which is, that's a way of learning. I think you have to be, it's interesting, you know, we think of universities as being the quintessential, so at the heart of learning, and oftentimes they're not good at learning. They're expert cultures. So there's a sense that we know how to do the thing we do. And I think companies like Coursera and others, new providers, are helping us rethink the way, how we do what we do. So partnering is a really important way of learning. That's one. Two, I think, and this is an argument, you know, Clay Christensen, who many of the people on this call know and passed away, a dear friend of some 40 years and was a member of my board. He would always argue that if you're a leader and you're trying to do some of this new and innovative stuff, you need to create safe spaces. You need to create spaces on the edge of the organization where people can try new things and not be penalized, because if they're trying genuinely new and innovative things, they're going to get some of it wrong for a while. And then I think I would be very wary of the kind of prescriptive frameworks we often use for quality. This idea of inputs that, you know, if you don't have this A, B, C, and D, you can't have quality. Move the lens of quality to the output and outcome side of the equation. In other words, when we can start to focus on measurable mastery of skills and knowledge, when employers can say back to us, these graduates are really good, give us more, you know you have quality. And then you can be much more innovative in how you get your graduates there. That is not the strength of incumbent higher education. In my visits to the kingdom, just to be frank, I think, you know, I heard this tension between real innovation of the kind that Jeff is properly applauding, but I also heard a preoccupation with rankings. And if I take a look at the traditional rankings, they tend to sort of reward the most traditional behaviors and approaches and strategies. And I would suggest to you that it's okay to continue to be really thoughtful about how do I position my institution in the ecosystem in ways that we're very proud of, but how do I also find safe spaces for innovation? And that can't happen if the regulatory bodies also don't sign on. So I can, as an institution, say, I want to try this very different approach to a learning program. But if my creditor, if my federal regulator doesn't allow me to do that, it really constrains. So the message is not only to the leaders of organizations, it's to the folks in the ministry, it's to the folks who are assigned to quality assurance. We've got to be in this innovation journey together. Lewis, I think you're on mute still.
Thank you, Paul, very much. Ted, some additional reflections.
Sure, and I think that both Paul and Jeff have really pointed out an important important idea of what we're not trying to do here and what we're not advocating. I think that it's easy to think about online learning opportunities versus on-campus learning opportunities. The syllabus versus competencies. And I think what you're hearing, what we're all trying to say at least, is that we're at a point where the world is moving so quickly that we need to adopt both and solutions. So for traditional universities, what the online environment and the competency-based environment provide is an opportunity to continue to do what universities do best and to augment that with shorter, crisper, either assessments of prior learning or learning itself through for example, the Coursera for Campus opportunity to graft on a course in AI that the university might not offer on its own, but would be important for people who are moving into those careers. And then on the Southern New Hampshire side, to begin to develop ways in which universities, when they're bringing students in or progressing them through a degree, that they can assess the learning that students have so that those students don't need to just sort of do it over again in a more structured way. So I think that this conversation, as we go forward, I'd like us to think about ways in which we can use the tools, the technology, the creativity, and the imagination that is now afoot in the world to augment the offerings of traditional universities in ways that advantage the students and the institutions. And let's think about this in the long run. Paul's point about creating opportunities and spaces for innovation. There's nothing to say that an institution can't experiment through augmentation on certain lines of study, certain degrees, certain elements of a curriculum, and decide over time that they'd like to develop a specialty in that themselves. It's a scaffold around what universities might become as this change happens. On the reverse side, I think all of us who are looking at the way the economy is changing, and think that this is as true in the kingdom as it is anywhere else, that the skills that are necessary today might not be the skills that are necessary tomorrow. And so this idea of augmenting the core of the university's experience provides flexibility to put things in place now that are important now, but maybe not embed them in the entire DNA of the institution as it goes forward, so that there's much more flexibility. And we're I think, really inviting a nimbleness that is going to be very important for institutions as we enter this world of change. So, Louis, I'm sorry I've gone on too long, but I think it's very exciting to think about ways in which these online opportunities can augment the core work of universities in ways that enhance the travel of students, but also enhance the ability of the universities themselves to experiment with the future.
Oh, thank you, Ted, for those comments, and really that emphasis on universities also learning and becoming something new. We did have a few questions come through the Q&A. I think some of them are about collaboration and online tools. I think those we can hold for the Q&A session. There was one that I thought was interesting about the relationship between online learning and different modalities and the healthcare professions. In the kingdom, apparently there's a demand for healthcare training and education. And wondering if Paul and Jeff might like to reflect on that. Paul, maybe you first. There was a particular part of the question that was about the clinical aspect of like a nursing degree and how you blend that with different solutions. And then Jeff, I'll come to you in a sec.
Yep, happy to jump in. So we often talk about online versus face-to-face. And of course, some of the most effective models are hybrids, where you combine the coursework, the classroom learning in whatever form, with hands-on sort of clinical. And one of the things that I think is really important, because we have the absolute same crisis in healthcare in the US, is that we have to move away from thinking about clock hours or clinical hours to mastery. So some of the more interesting online programs, I think of David Scheibel's work at Excelsior, for example, which has a very large online nursing program. They've moved to a competency-based model for their nurses. So if I am training to be a nurse and I can demonstrate under the watchful eye of an experienced nurse supervisor or faculty member, if I can demonstrate the ability to do X or Y, why would you ask me to do more of that? As soon as I'm confident, as soon as I, the person sort of signing up, are confident I can do that, let's have you sort of move on. Inversely, if it takes you longer than the prescribed hours to master a different kind of treatment or process, I want to make sure you master that. I don't want you working with patients till I know. So we move away from these kind of prescriptive clinical hour notions, which are just really sort of crude instruments to thinking about competencies and mastery in that way. But the key, I think, Louis, is that you do need to have, and look at, there's lots we can do with simulations. We've done work with Boston Children's Hospital, for example, with nursing simulations. But at the end of the day, hybrids are the model here. And by reducing the time and the cost of the coursework side, and by giving people more options for how they consume that, you make the whole of the program much more efficient and workable.
Yeah, I guess what I would add to that, and I'll just try to show some examples. But I came over here and I typed in, if you go to Coursera and just say subject health, you can see there's 647 different courses, and there's psychological first aid from Johns Hopkins, writing in the sciences, the business of healthcare, drug development, product development, Stanford Introduction to Food and Health. There's just a very wide array. And what a school can do is they can choose which courses they want to integrate for that hybrid model that Ted and Paul are talking about. If I go here and type in public health and just see sort of within a domain of health, what you can see are, here's a specialization, which is a 5-course series in Foundations of Public Health from Imperial College of London. Epidemiology, 5-course series from Johns Hopkins. I go here and I can say, well, look at this. Here's a master's of public health. This is a full master's degree from Imperial College of London. And you can see the syllabus, the admissions criteria, et cetera, and earn a master's in public health from Imperial College of London, which is one of the obviously premier institutions in the world. So that nimbleness that Ted talks about is very much present. And then the other thing I'll just kind of mention that is really amazing to me is the pedagogy. So one of the big limiting factors for many different health roles is the need to do clinical training. And obviously during the pandemic, that came to a standstill. We couldn't have students walking into patients' rooms during a pandemic, especially when many of the patients were suffering from COVID. We are working with a small startup that is actually an offshoot from one of the university partners that we work with. And what they are developing are glasses with a camera and a little screen that sit right, the doctor wears them. The doctor, when they're doing their clinical rounds, actually has a tablet, and on this tablet, the students can chat with the professor. Now, the students are online. The professor is literally walking around the hospital, and the students are seeing everything right, almost literally through the eyes of the professor. So when the professor walks in to see a patient, all the students can see that patient. The students can chat to the professor, questions to ask the patient without being an encumbrance on that patient-doctor relationship. And importantly, rather than having just 5 students sitting in the room, you can have 500 students actually to some degree having a more intimate experience, because not only they can see what the doctors are seeing, they can plug the instruments in and they can see the instruments that the doctor is seeing. And just like Ted said, it's not all virtual or all online. There are creative solutions that are often very simple, but beyond what many people had been imagining, and they're happening right now. So we are going to see an incredible increase in capacity, and I believe quality in our ability to train more people in many healthcare professions than we've ever seen before. So I think, again, a lot of promise from the changes that we see now possible.
Hey, Jeff and Louis, I'm sorry to dive in, but we're talking about nimbleness. We're talking about person-to-person care and the kind of work that we need in a clinical setting. I know that one of the things that Coursera was called on to do very early in the pandemic was to help the United States develop a contact tracing system, right? And can you talk a little bit about how with Johns Hopkins, we loaded up, Johns Hopkins loaded up a training program?
Yeah. Ted, thank you. This is a great example of the speed and scale that can happen, not just from institution, but through institutions working together. So the state of New York, when COVID was just breaking out in the US, as many people remember, one of the worst initial breakouts was in New York. And Bloomberg Philanthropies decided that we needed, they were going to help the state of New York create a very large cadre of contact tracers, but they needed a training program. And so they have Bloomberg Philanthropies has a relationship with Johns Hopkins. So they called Johns Hopkins and said, we would like you to develop a contact training program for all contact tracers in the state of New York. And of course, this is what Johns Hopkins is good at. Johns Hopkins is a university partner at Coursera. And they said, hey, Coursera, we want to create a contact tracing program for the state of New York, but we want this to be available to any health agency in the US and any individual in the world. Will you be willing to do that with us? And we said, absolutely. In 4 weeks, Johns Hopkins created a 5-hour contact training program. And let me just do a screen share and I'll show you what it looks like. So in 4 weeks, Johns Hopkins created this. Hopkins contact. Here's the course. Johns Hopkins created this course, COVID-19 contact tracing. It's free to anyone in the world. Emily Gurley is the PhD who did it. 1.3 million people in the world have taken this course to train their folks on contact tracing. Literally in the last 30 days, 764,000 people have seen this page. This is all free. This is an example of a state working with the university, who then works with a private partner like Coursera to develop important training for healthcare, and then distributes that training to any individual in the world, as well as any public health agency that wants to do this to train their contact tracers. And within 4 weeks, it was created. Within another 4 weeks, we had 400,000 people who had taken this course. And now, a little bit later in the pandemic, almost 1.4 million people have taken it. So it's just, again, it's a good example of the speed and scale that's possible with institutional collaboration.
We are a little bit over time. I want to take the opportunity to thank Jeff, Paul, and Ted for helping us navigate this, the beginning of opening our dialogue about MOOCs for credit and extra institutional learning. I know Paul needs to probably leave us a little bit earlier, so I'd like to give him any final words he'd like to say before he might have to leave us. And Jeff will be staying with us for other sessions. So
yes.
Only that I'd echo something Jeff said, which is I think the kingdom has demonstrated a willingness to think very boldly and courageously in rethinking how it does its work as a society. And this is a wonderful opportunity to be a world leader, a global leader in the ways that we're talking about. So really appreciate and honored to be included. Thank you. I do have to run off. Harvard needs some help apparently, so I'm going to make my way over to the campus as part of a visiting team today. But be well, and thank you so much for having me.
Paul is being modest. He is helping to evaluate Harvard's education programs, and it shows two things. One, Paul is a man to be reckoned with, and two, yes, even Harvard needs some quality control.
We'll see if they believe that too. But thank you so much, Ted. Take care, everyone. Bye.
See you, Paul.
So thanks for kicking us off. That was a great panel to get a leadership perspective on how MOOCs are evolving, how the ecosystem of learning that exists outside of universities is emerging and growing, and how you'd be beginning to think about how universities can connect into that as they're trying to meet the needs of their societies, their students, their economies. And now we're going to shift into the part of our presentation that unpacks the processes in leadership ACE has had over a 60-year period in evaluating extra institutional learning, including MOOCs. Ted intimated this when he kicked us off in our welcome. And I'll kick us off with a few slides, some of which will do a little broader table setting than what happened. And then my colleague, Michele Spires, who leads that evaluation work with her team for ACE, will take us through a process, take us through describing the way that process works. I think in some ways we'll handle some of the questions in the Q&A by simply going through the process, but we can certainly revisit some of those questions as we go to our discussion sessions at the end of the time together. Ted, you came back on. I just want to make sure that were there any other remarks you had before we move into the presentation? No, okay. I'm going to reshare my screen. From the current slide. Okay, so what I wanted to do is take a little step back. And it's clear the kingdom is thinking very deeply and strategically about the connection between its higher ed system, its human capital, economic growth. And it is among the leaders around the world that at least since the mid-80s have been wrestling with this question. As we moved into a knowledge economy, much of the research that drove that dialogue came from the innovation research literature and then the economic research literature, most recently written about by Joseph Stiglitz and Paul Romer. Folks will remember those folks as Nobel laureates. And it really tracked the emergence of a learning economy. And as different nations responded differently, even global organizations, the UN, European organizations, the EU, as they started wrestling with the learning economy, they realized that there was meaningful learning happening outside of formal education settings. And the chart at the right of this diagram around lifelong and life-wide learning was developed by the Life Center, which is a National Science Foundation collaboration with Stanford University and the University of Washington, where they began to develop deep research into the learning that happens outside of formal education settings. On the horizontal axis of this diagram are roughly the different stages of formal education, kindergarten, grades 1 through 12. This is in the US domestic setting, undergraduate education, graduate education, then you go on to work. And you see in the middle of the diagram, this darker green, which based on the waking hours we have in a day, how much time we actually spend in formal education. And the lighter green is all the rest of our lives. The learning economy literature basically studies all the learning that's happening in that lighter green. And it's been growing in learning intensity. In the mid-90s, there was a study done of how much learning was actually happened in the production of Boeing 737 Dreamliner. This is one of Boeing's most complex planes at the time. And the researchers that researched it estimated that just in the simple production of that sophisticated piece of the knowledge economy, an associate's degree worth of learning occurred just in the building of that airplane in no formal environments. So learning intensity is rising. In the US context, while Ted was our Undersecretary of Education, they dug deeper into this space with the document here, Reimagining the Role of Technology in Higher Education. So Ted's been leading this work at the national level and national policy level in the US. And equally as important, our federal arm for ensuring that we're doing the right basic research in new areas, the National Science Foundation is investing in this. So the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is on the same track as other innovative nations moving in this direction. This, of course, this slide is a variety of samplings of the literature that are emerging in the practice of how you understand that learning that's happening in non-college settings and their connection to higher education. But what's happening is this is creating a fairly complex ecosystem, right? Jeff intimated this in his unpacking for us of Coursera's work. And you'll see Coursera on this slide. But what's emerging is new pathways that connect into universities. And there are so many different variations of it. You'll see that there are individual providers that are providing general education. So what would be considered lower division courses in the United States, freshman and sophomore courses, as opposed to graduate level courses. Ubiquitous learning, Coursera is seen here. Different folks that are sourcing from companies, from other colleges and universities, from different contexts. This is a sample of the MOOC universe, emergent and complex. Ways of assessing, these are just samples. Different organizations emerging to actually do assessment in this space. Different forms of credentials and badges, and how do you badge competency as opposed to award credit are also emerging. And then you'll see ACE, both having done historical work, mapping employer training to college credits, which Michelle will talk about in a second. And also increasingly reviewing many of the different providers you see around the ecosystem. And I want to echo Paul here and Ted a little bit and say that it's an exciting time for higher education leaders around the world and in the kingdom, in the US for sure. The depth with understanding what quality means to us, how we define quality within our institutions and build those pathways and in flexible enough ways to meet what is still an emerging ecosystem of other learning providers that can connect into our work. And ACE's role that Michelle will talk about has been to really look at quality assurance and rigor and how that applies in this emerging ecosystem. So with that, I will continue to track the Q&A, and I'm going to hand it all over to Michelle. I think, Michelle, it's easier if I drive, so you just tell me when you want to advance slides.
That would be great. And thank you, Louis. So greetings and thank you very much for this honor. I really appreciate the panel framing the ecosystem and the value of credit for prior learning. And Louis, for your previous slide, if we pause for just a moment and think about the history and where we ACE started in 1918 to really support our veterans returning from the war to elevate their skills and to pursue job opportunities. The ecosystem looks different now as a result of technology, but the journey has been long going for more than 100 years. So let's level set in terms of credit for prior learning and the impact. So Lewis, if you'll move us forward just a second here. I think it's important. There's a lot of terminology that is used for credit for prior learning. Ted led our national task force on the transfer for student success, and that is a huge part of the value proposition in leaning into why there is a need for credit for prior learning to support our learners. As we are defining it today, we are focusing on the broader term of credit for prior learning, and we're thinking about that learning in terms of the learning acquired outside of formal higher education classroom, so outside post-secondary education, and it's assessed and validated as learning equivalencies so that we can use that almost as a translation to support those experiences. So again, for a part of our level setting in the next slide, as we're moving forward, the value of that credit for prior learning is really rich and rooted in some research. We know that it really supports learners in their completion because they persist. They also take more credits, and the value of that learning builds their confidence in a way that we see that next level of attainment and completion. So the key components of credit for prior learning on the next slide kind of showcase some very specific examples of what that looks like. We are going to do a little deeper analysis on the review process that we at ACE Learning Evaluations conduct to look at credit and competency recommendations. But there are other third-party review processes. There are other direct assessments through the United States National Exam and Testing. Academic campuses do their own portfolio assessments or partner with professional industries and certifications like Project Management Professional Test or Airframe and Mechanics by the FAA for aviation industry. And as part of that National Transfer Task Force work that Ted led, a key component and an outcome is the joint statement on the transfer and award of credit, which very specifically includes credit for prior learning as part of that transfer imperative. And that sets the foundation for supporting campuses. And to Paul's point earlier about the accrediting authorities supporting these initiatives and opportunities to be a little bit more flexible, to be more nimble, and to integrate. So let's really look at ACE's learning evaluations on the next slide. I've been with the American Council on Education for a very long time and really driving learning evaluations work and in this adult learner space or independent learner space to help seek that economic mobility by connecting traditional and non-traditional experiences. This really connects to our ACE strategic priorities to champion equity, access, and completion. The process I'm going to share with you really demonstrates how faculty, those college faculty, are key in collaboration with psychometricians and industry experts to conduct in-depth reviews analyzing the content, scope, rigor, breadth, and depth. And in fact, Lewis and Ted have already kind of planted those seeds that is key to our process. We document that learning right now in a learning currency using the semester hour credit recommendation and also in learning competencies using some of our US national frameworks. And we are building on the need and the importance to integrate technology, and Ted spoke about that with his remarks as well. We need digital credentials such as ACE's working transcript that's powered by our partner Credly, and for our military connected community, we have a tool called the Joint Services Transcript. On the next slide, and I'm very sorry that Paul is not here. You can go ahead and click one more time, Lewis. What you see at the top is what an individual learns is more important than when, where, or how they learned it. And that's exactly what he was talking about in terms of those outcomes. Our focus has always been about that learner success and validating those outcomes to equivalencies that academic institutions can benchmark. We know that learning occurs in all different places. And thank you to the panel for sharing that. An interesting validation is that in May of 2021, we ACE surveyed students who had recently requested their ACE working transcript. We had about 1,200 respondents, and 61% indicated they would like to go to school, but they really need to better understand how their credit will be accepted, specifically to which courses and programs, the costs that connect to that experience, and access to more advising support. So we don't want to have students repeat courses, waste time and money, and we really want to help with their success to completion. So Louis, as we move on forward to the next slide, our ACE evaluation success is on that quality and integrity of the process and our outcomes. That being said, we honor and respect that learning occurs in so many environments, but the key is the validation that is trusted by you and the colleges and universities, licensing agencies, employers. So in our portfolio of what it is that we ACE Learning Evaluations evaluate, we have national and professional examinations, we have occupations, we evaluate apprenticeship experiences, we evaluate courses, and we work very closely with our MOOC colleagues, particularly as Jeff alluded, making sure that there's individual benchmarks in there to ensure that learner success. So as we take a look at who some of our clients are, I'm going to divide these kind of into a couple of categories. So we have learning evaluations clients that represent all types of employers, education and training providers. And you can see on the right-hand side of the slide, there's a list of some of our clients, not all of them, and they're just listed in alphabetical order. As we think about the work that's going on, we have to find a way to promote that, and we make that available in an open source database called the ACE National Guide. So since 1974, when we started the review of all kinds of corporate employers and national examinations, that can be found in our public source National Guide database. We have about 2,000 active courses with over 25,000 publications over the course of time. What's really interesting is the emergence of and the value of apprenticeship programs to support learning. So for example, IBM is a client because they have employees and they are having some of their training materials evaluated for academic credit. But IBM also has a very rich apprenticeship program that's 1 year long, 164 classroom hours, and 2,000 on-the-job hours. So as we evaluated that learning, the yield was 45 semester hour credits spanning areas of software development, web programming, cloud applications, project management to business communications. And with that, partnering with colleges and universities, helping to set those apprentices up for success, not only in completing a degree, but also in their journey and employment journey with IBM as a software engineer. In another area of our work, and this is separated out because it is connected with a contract, is that learning evaluations and the American Council on Education has been working with the U.S. Department of Defense since 1954 to evaluate formal learning in terms of training and courses and occupation experiences for our U.S. Armed Services. So due to the nature of the contract, these evaluation and review results have to be maintained in a separate database environment for right now. But as Ted said, we need to be really thoughtful about merging our technologies and creating opportunities to communicate more dynamically. But this guide includes the evaluation results since 1954, which is when we started this work. So how does this work unfold? What does the process look like? Now that we have some framing of who the clients are for ACE and why we've been engaged in this work for more than 65 years, here are some of the process steps. And the tantamount to success is starting with that review readiness, ensuring all clients, regardless of their sector, are really ready for a review. So that's ensuring the steps include consultation, application, pre-review, and preparation. And as part of that, it's security of any online learning experiences, records management for the individual learners, that each learning experience, regardless, includes some form of individual assessment. We're going to talk about assessment a lot, and it's not just a test, right? Jeff, you talked about that very explicitly. There can be performance demonstrations as a component of that assessment. But review readiness takes significant amount of time for both the client and for our ACE team and colleagues with their subject matter expertise. So as you're moving around that pathway, once it's determined the client is ready, and the client also feels prepared, they're doing some self-reflection on the breadth and scope of where they are preparing for a review, then we move into the actual execution of the work. That means we are engaging and actually hiring college faculty from accredited institutions to really conduct the analysis of our work. They work with psychometricians and industry experts, but the faculty are driving the collaboration. It is an in-depth review, and we take extra care to make sure that we're really diversifying the faculty teams from across the United States, varying the types of institutions and the accrediting authorities that they represent. The faculty must also have been teaching for a minimum of 5 years, and they're evaluating the content in that learning experience, whether it's a course, a national exam, an occupation, or apprenticeship, based on their disciplinary expertise of what it is they are teaching. So how do the faculty really review the course and dig in? I first want to, illuminate that this is a really deep dive. It's a review of 100% of the materials, and it's not just a review of course planning documents. We are looking at the objectives, the goals, how assessment is occurring, and in the example of looking at the medical industry, that includes those clinical experiences, the virtual reality experiences, to those outcomes for success. But all assessments must have that individual component of achievement, and we're looking at a minimum in order to benchmark credit recommendations at a 70% successful completion. And that's a fairly standard practice in our national transfer models, that you must have achieved a 70% better to transfer one course to another. So we kind of hold some of those requirements to the same expectations with our in-depth review. So the faculty come together, they look at all of the instructor materials, all of the student materials, all of those assessments, all of the lab environments, and they use some standard taxonomies to help us unfold and determine. They have to come to consensus, which in some cases can be a challenge when faculty are representing different types of institutions and different types of accrediting authorities, and particularly with some of our engineering lenses and ABET accreditation, really thinking deeply about how this would set a learner up for success. As they analyze that work, collaborate, they write out the learning outcomes, the credit recommendations, and that is documented in a semester hour currency. So those are the multiple measures. Lewis, if you move us forward to the next slide, those are the multiple measures and the key components as part of ACE's review process. The challenge, particularly in the United States, there is no one higher education industry standard or subject area taxonomy or program pathways to benchmark. So we, ACE, are establishing that national framework to determine the semester hour alignment based on subject area credit recommendations, and through our U.S. Department of Education classification of index and programs, we call those SIP codes. So the faculty teams can write their credit recommendations at a variety of levels in semester hours. So vocational is kind of that technical area in our U.S. standard of system. They're not necessarily associate's degree programs, but what we're finding is real rich learning in tactical or technical areas that needs to be part of a learner's portfolio. Previously, in years prior to where we are today, that was a predominant alignment with technical work. But in the US, with the implementation of applied associates of science degrees, we see a lot more of those types of learning experiences validated at the lower division or baccalaureate level. So that would be your 100 and 200 level in the US structure. Faculty evaluators also align credits at the upper division level, and those are found in the last 2 years of a bachelor's program, and it's a little bit more advanced in terms of the scope and depth. We also find in some cases real rich learning that's occurring at the graduate level. For example, in our military connected learning, particularly in some of our medical areas and medical communities, the military is really training to a very high level specialized skill. Military learners are conducting critical analysis, applying scholarly application, demonstrating 80% performance or better, and including independent research. So the faculty are able to align those credit recommendations at the graduate level. Again, it's focused on the outcomes and the correlation to the learning that is occurring. Since each faculty team varies and is different, on the next slide, what you'll see is how we balance that evaluation reliability with the faculty that don't exactly represent every single institution. We ACE have standardized tools. We're not only benchmarking Bloom's taxonomy to determine alignment of credit level to outcomes, but we also have a standard terms and definitions of our content and our assessment. We use internal checklists and rubrics, and we really ask the faculty to document their thought process in coming to those credit recommendations and decisions. And again, this is regardless of who that client type is, an employer, a MOOC, a military connected learning experience, an occupation, or an apprenticeship. We're also using rubrics to document those instructional domains that connect with workforce industry, so we can have competencies connected in addition to those learning currencies. So having the faculty come to consensus on content, scope, rigor, breadth, and depth creates that framework for consistency and that inter-rater reliability. The learning evaluations team, the work of ACE led by Ted, we are making an impact. We are moving into the next realm of digital credentials and transcripts and creating opportunity with our working transcript powered by Credly. In the past 12 months, for example, these digital credentials have reached more than 2.5 million independent learners. So as we are working with employers and these learning experiences and validating this, we're creating some flexibility and independent ownership of the learner's records so that it can be portable. As we talked about in the panel, having smaller learning opportunities, creating those nuggets, building the stackable capabilities. Our relationship with the Department of Defense means we ACE are validating the military transcript, again called the Joint Services Transcript, by ensuring the accuracy and integrity of the credit recommendations. And this creates trust with the colleges and universities to accept all of our transcripts. So the rigor and integrity of our process, the validation that we work through the ACE working transcript along with our military transcript means our academic institutions in the US can trust the credit recommendations and the process to use that. There was a question in the Q&A about not every institution accepts our credit recommendations. We understand that. Every institution has their mission and vision, but as Ted has put out with the National Task Force on Transfer Credit, there's an imperative to rethink how that works for our learners and their success. So as we're moving forward and we're thinking about the richness of the work, and I realize I shared a lot of information with you, our learning evaluations engagement portfolio, we are growing and modernizing our work, particularly with digital credentials expanding data exchanges and interoperable systems in order to create that learner-focused network to better create transparency, access, and equity. And what we have to do is surround these programs with research and outreach in terms of helping professional learning and training experiences for colleges, universities, for our clients, and for our learners. And this is an ongoing journey that we have to work together to continue for success. So with that, Louis, any additional observations or remarks that you would like to share?
Now I'm going to stop sharing the screen for a moment and just reflect on, for the journey that the kingdom is on, and that Coursera is on, that Southern New Hampshire is on, ACE is on as well. The world of ensuring that quality learning is being connected such that we can serve our students well and our nations well, builds workforce training, educate human beings, and grow our economies. It is emerging, and ACE is really blending a body of legacy work here. And I just want to come back to the faculty and the peer review process we use in a second. And we are learning and growing with all the stakeholders in the ecosystem that we described earlier. And at its essence, though, is assuring that from a higher ed perspective, the learning that we would like to connect to, perhaps from outside, is at a level of quality that matches our programs and the quality that we want to give to our students. And so Michele, thank you for that. It was a great way. I think that we started with two leaders really laying out a kind of a map of the universe we're operating in. And then we went into a picture of the way we can begin to think about the quality assurance and how learning can be connected in meaningful ways, and also in ways that are accessible. The world is so complex for a higher ed leader, a president of a university, or a provost, a rector. How can the collaborations that they might want to form be made workable? They're busy professionals. I'm sure the folks on the call and participants today are busy. So what I wanted to do, we're just a little bit over time. We are slated for a break right now. We want to take a 10-minute break. At my time, it would be being back at 8:32. I've lost track. What time is it in the kingdom again? Can someone remind me?
It's 3:22.
Thank you. So if we can be back at 3:32 in the kingdom, and then our next two sessions are, we're going to unpack the Saudi context a little bit more, in particular with Jeff and with Ted, and then we'll go to Q&A. I'll take some of my time during the break to go back to the Q&A questions that have been building up. Some of them we've answered, but I'll also try to catalog the others and group them. And then we have a final Q&A session that we can go to after the Saudi context session. So if we can get back at 8:32, and we'll continue our terrific conversation. Thank you. Okay, give credit a moment to join us. Perfect. So Ted and Jeff, I was cataloging the questions in the Q&A, and there was I just want to start with we can address those in the Q&A, but I think it's there were questions across the gamut from quality assurance in this emerging ecosystem, the security of assessments, the efficacy of online teaching. What kind of information is shared among these different stakeholders that might partner on learning? What occurred to me to start with in the questions range from things that could be public policy questions, things that could be institutional practice questions, and things that could be what individual faculty might want to do and need to do. Let's just start with as ACE went through its process, and Michele, any initial reflections from there, and then maybe we could talk about the kingdom in light of how it might want to approach that. Jeff, let me start with you, and then I'll go to Ted.
Sounds good. Thank you. And I during the break, I saw all the Q&A. I started typing in answers, and These are great questions, and I don't have answers to all of them, but there might be some very helpful things. So we could also just run right through them. To your broader question, though, Louis, when I go, we work with hundreds of government agencies around the world, in Latin America, in Europe, Australia, India, Southeast Asia, et cetera. And I think that what's really unique about the kingdom, when I think about the possibility of what technology can do, is, I'll just pull back up this sort of ecosystem slide. Today we have lots of learners. We now have 690,000 learners on Coursera in Saudi Arabia, but we also work with a number of institutions. And so I look at some of the universities who publish on Coursera include Al Faisal and KAUST. Other universities in the Middle East that publish on Coursera include Khalifa and University of Jordan for Science and Technology. Universities in Saudi Arabia who use Coursera for their students include University of Jeddah, KAUST, Afat University, and then there are a number of other universities in Egypt. We're working with the National eLearning Center to bring Coursera to universities. All around the world, we have universities and we work with businesses. And so some of the businesses in Saudi Arabia include Aramco, Saudi Telecom, Al Turki, Sierra Group, Saudi Cement. So this is not super unique that we work with universities who subscribe, we work with universities who publish, we work with businesses, we work with governments. I think what's very interesting about Saudi Arabia is the possibility for coordinated action. It's very rare. In fact, it's unique so far globally that we have as Coursera a presence among so many different institutions, but not just individually, working with a policy-making group, National eLearning Center, being able to actually facilitate coordination and collaboration among those institutions. We see pieces of this in other countries, but I really do believe that Saudi Arabia is uniquely situated to coordinate action among institutions to deliver through collaboration, a greater impact to the citizens of the kingdom than what we see as likely feasible in almost any other country. So we are honored to be a part of this, and we think that there's some very exciting possibilities ahead.
And please, reflections and thoughts.
Yeah, so let me dive in and follow on where Jeff ended. I think, as Michele walked us through the processes that we use at ECE to evaluate experiences and do the translation into course credit. And what's behind that is really our effort, and we've been, I think, very successful at it, to create a quality assurance mechanism that then provides both learners and institutions with a green light to go ahead and deploy these learning experiences in the creation of a broader learning experience for students. I think I want to take a big step back, and I want to talk about the importance of universities in this mix. I think that one of the great virtues of universities in the kingdom and in the US, across Europe, is that those institutions are trusted, and they are trusted by governments to use public dollars in a responsible way. They're trusted by employers to provide certification that people will be able to have productive careers in particular industries and businesses. And they're trusted by the learners themselves, that when they go to a university, they will be working with faculty, whether it's on campus or online, who are top of the field. And I think that that's what we're trying to talk about today, is how can we establish that trust online at scale for more learners in more disciplines and more specializations than ever before. And I think that that's the opportunity that we're talking about. and Jeff, it was great that you started with the very first slide of Daphne and Andrew. I think that that's where they started, right? How can we provide the world's best education to the world's biggest population in a way that makes sense? And I think we're there. I think we're at the cusp of this. And if I can sort of pull back the curtain a little bit and talk some about the only frustration that we have at ACE is, quite frankly, that there isn't in the States a coordinated ability to take this opportunity and run with it. And like Jeff, I think that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is positioned not only to capitalize on where we are, but to move forward faster than almost any other country that we've worked with. Michelle mentioned, and Louis did as well, that I spent some time in the US government, where I was Undersecretary of Education. I was in charge of all of higher education. And try as we might, we could never move the very decentralized US higher education system into this world. We could have a whole nother webinar in which we could talk about the ways that didn't work. But I think what we're hopeful for is an opportunity in our engagement, collective engagement, to really demonstrate the way in which we can move high quality learning at scale into the hands of every institution, into the hands of every learner, with an absolute rock solid commitment to quality. And that's why we're here. So let me use an example that connects Coursera and ACE. And Jeff mentioned the Google certificates. It was on one of his slides. Sorry, I just kicked my keyboard off. Jeff mentioned the Google certificates, and it's an example of just what I'm talking about. So I was at UCLA for many years. I was at Stanford for many years. I was at Occidental College for many years. And in none of those institutions could a student enroll in a course that would give them a certification from Google in a specific area of data science, data visualization, social media development. None of those. Now, does that mean that a Stanford education wasn't worth it? No. But what it really means is that Stanford has the opportunity to bolt on to its undergraduate curriculum or its graduate curriculum Google certificates, and because ACE has vetted those courses against the standards that Stanford faculty and UCLA faculty and Occidental faculty and Harvard faculty have for that kind of intellectual rigor. Stanford, UCLA, Occidental, all of the places that I've worked, they could accommodate a Google certificate as a part of the curriculum. So what does that mean? It means for the institution that they don't have to go out and hire faculty around this particular specialization. It means that they have assurance that the trust that they have earned in the world is going to be replicated by the trust that we have at ACE in the quality of the curriculum. And it means that they can offer a wider range of opportunities to their learners. I think that that's the magic here, is that universities can add to their portfolio of courses, add to their menu, courses, certificates, and degrees that have been vetted professionally by the highest, through the highest standards of the academic enterprise. And so the opportunity is an opportunity to combine rigor and scale. And so, Jeff, how many Google Cert enrollees are there?
There are, well, across all the certs, I'll just quickly show, this is kind of where we are right now. And Ted, you mentioned a wider range of opportunities. Universities can obviously offer a wider range of learning opportunities. But if you look at some of these professional certificates, which are really a nice supplement, an augmentation, as you say, to what the universities do, these are opportunities to learn and also opportunities to be pretty well qualified coming out of college to pick up the job in these very fast growing job opportunities, whether that's sales operations, data analyst, data analytics. Altogether, Ted, to answer your question, about 2.2 million people have enrolled across these 17, 14 or so certificates. We will have over 30 certificates within the next 6 months. So what's happening now is other employers, and not just in the US, around the world, are seeing this model and saying, we want to contribute to the education of young people in partnership with higher education as well, all over the world. So these certificates, they're well-known brands, but they're also US brands. We are now creating industry partnerships globally where the whole global community of higher education and the whole global community of industry can participate. And to your point, working with ACE and other types of quality assurance organizations, make sure that you don't sacrifice the quality with that scale.
Right, and if we go back to that slide and think about all of those boxes, Michele and her team are at work taking a look at each of those and making sure that the rigor and the quality, the assessments, the standards, and the competencies are all in line with the highest standards of the academy, so that the translation that we and the universities make is seamless and effective. And again, that the greatest currency that we all have is trust, and so that the trust in the institution, the trust in the certificate is borne out. I want to just say a couple of other really quick things. I mentioned scale and mentioned the opportunities in the kingdom. I do believe that there is an opportunity to develop a public policy perspective on this that really asks a couple of questions. If at the front end there are these degrees that are being offered online, and there are individual courses that are being offered online, and there are certificates that translate into course credit that are offered online, let's call all of that MOOC. That if there is a quality standard and a quality assurance mechanism that is approved by the government in a public policy, in rigorous public policy analysis, then what it does is it creates a national menu for institutions of courses, degrees, and certificates that can be used, Jeff, your word is a good one, to augment what is already going on campus. That can have the benefit of providing some short-term opportunities, potentially some long-term opportunities, and a lot of flexibility in the middle. But what matters is to be able to say, through a public policy mechanism, that the quality is assured, the trust is maintained, and then we collectively will make sure that the students who have those experiences, that their success is reflected in the market uptake, their success in their work, their ability to move from position to position. As Paul said very early on in our conversation today, ultimately this is about outcomes, and we want to make sure that we have a focus on that.
Thank you both for that. You kind of covered so many different spaces. I want to kind of try to blend some of the specifics of the Q&A questions. There were a few very specific questions about credit that our Saudi hosts will bring to us at the end of this session. We have a few more minutes in this session. The Q&A questions we saw there were some that were really about transparency of information. Some was about the use of tools, and then others was about security, and I think particularly security around assessment. Ted, when you were talking about trust and that large set of courses. How does transparency of information help in university leaders and outside partners? How does that help them have trust in that system?
Yeah, so great question, and I think that let's talk about the trust in the way that Michele was establishing it. I think that whether we're talking about degrees or courses or certificates that translate into courses, we really are talking about an evaluation mechanism that demonstrates to a consumer, whether that's an institution or an individual, that this menu of opportunities has been vetted against very high quality standards, and that the transparency of that process is important. And Michele really took us deep to help develop that transparency. The question of security, Jeff and I talk about this all the time, and we talk about this all the time in our work, Michele and Louis, about what are the opportunities in a technologically sophisticated world for people to game this system. There are plenty of them. And that's why in this quality assurance process, it's really important for us to develop very high standards of cybersecurity in terms of the validity of the exams. Jeff mentioned the proctoring, the digital proctoring of exams. So we take that very seriously. And it's one of the threshold items. I won't name names, but one of the folks on the chart that you showed of the ecosystem would like very much to be in ACE's credit world, but they aren't, because we are not comfortable that they have the cybersecurity right on the assessments. And it is frustrating for them, and it's frustrating for us, but until they get there, we won't authorize them for ACE credit. So I think that transparency is important. And it's also important to know that it's not just a check off the box system. It really is quite rigorous to the discipline.
I'd love to jump in too on this. You made a comment about a hybrid world, and it really is so true. I mean, I think people talk about hybrid teaching and learning, which is, some people are online, some people are on campus. Absolutely right. People talk about hybrid credentials. This is true too. More and more students will graduate with both a degree and an industry certificate as well. It's not either or. In the working world, we talk about hybrid work. People will work in offices and they will work online, and the same person will sometimes work in an office and online. And while they're in the office, they will both also be working online. And when you are on campus, students will also be online. It is completely hybrid. Well, with assessments and academic integrity, we see similar things. So we have, thousands of universities using Coursera, and some say, we want to supplement a course I'm already teaching with just a lecture on Coursera. And maybe there's a quiz. You know what? Honor code is fine. Just say that you won't cheat. That's fine for me. I have other assessments to make sure that you've mastered the material. We have some cases where, as you know, Ted, with ACE is ID verification and anti-plagiarism built into it. And then some where we do online proctoring, where with the University of Michigan, they want to make sure that during the final exams, now not during every formative assessment, but during the final exams, they want to make sure that there's a live virtual proctor watching the webcam and making sure that a student isn't cheating. I was in Saudi in December, and from there I went up to the World Congress for Higher Education in Cairo. And when I was there, I met with a number, probably 13 university presidents. We all convened to talk about the future. And I remember one of those presidents, who is a Coursera for Campus customer, said, Jeff, for certain kinds of courses and certain kinds of tests, I don't trust them unless they take my test in front of my eyes. Guess what? That's possible too. So on Coursera, and there were some questions about tools. All the content on Coursera was built using authoring tools on Coursera. Every customer, a lot of people don't realize this, every customer, like a university that uses other content on Coursera, the professors also have access to all the same authoring tools. So professors can build courses themselves on Coursera for free. We host it for free. They could deliver it to their own students for free. And they can go with hybrid content. Okay, so a lot of professors are saying, I'll take the courses from Coursera, but I want to write the final exam And that final exam is going to happen in my classroom. The students will be on laptops or notebooks taking my test in front of my eyes. And it's a hybrid world. I mean, so depending on what professors want to do, some will rely on the technology to do the proctoring and academic assessments. Others might say, I want it to be in my environment taking my test. That test, though, was authored on Coursera by that professor, so it's all still integrated and scalable. So it's just an amazing range of possibility.
Yeah, and Jeff, I think you've hit the theme of this afternoon's webinar, which is this is not a seek and replace, to think about it as a word processing program. This is really, how can we use these tools to augment what we're doing already in a way that benefits the institution, the faculty member, and the student. And it's really about figuring out what the right mix is, which will be determined by the professor, by the institution, by the ministry.
Absolutely.
So thank you both. I'd like to invite Dr. Rami into our conversation and invite all the panelists to stay with us, because I think the questions he has for us, we could handle in different ways. So thank you, Dr. Rami.
Yes, I appreciate it, Mr. Lewis. Actually, we have a couple of questions, and I would like to maybe frame them in a couple of main questions, which relate directly to the credit or the accreditations of MOOC in general. So let me start with the first, and I don't think we have enough time to answer them all. So maybe we'll take the top three. The first question, what is the general practice for the selection of a MOOC for credit?
Yeah, I can say that it really varies. One thing it's quite straightforward is when a university will sort of look to an accrediting body like an ACE and say, anything the ACE has vetted and recommended, we will accept for credit with the same number of credits as is recommended by ACE. With universities across India, the national policy in India is moving very aggressively to encourage tens of millions of more Indian young adults to get college degrees, and they realize they cannot build that many universities. So they're really facilitating with policy the ability to not only offer degrees online, but integrate other content from other online providers like another university into an online degree. In those cases, the government is creating a credit bank and an accreditation body. Usually, though, the school will run it through their accreditation process and say, we will choose, maybe being influenced by these accreditation bodies, we will choose, what kinds of courses we want to offer. So it really varies around the world. And I would say to the degree that you have national policies and these kind of quality review mechanisms, it facilitates faster integration of MOOC content for credit transfer into the on-campus curriculum.
All right, very well. Thanks a lot, Jeff. Second question, and it could be for ACE or for you, Jeff. How do universities work in recognizing the credit for MOOCs offered by other institutions? In other words, credit recognition and transfer.
Yeah, Ted, you want to take this one first?
Sure. So I think that the credit recognition and transfer, Michelle talked a couple of times about ACE's national effort to make that to make that transfer a frictionless process. And in the very decentralized system in the US, that's difficult because those decisions ultimately are made on an institution by institution basis. That is, there are 6,000 different committees making those decisions, and it is suboptimal, it is not efficient, and it really harms the learners most. And so we have advocated for some time, including my time in the US Department of Education, for a more centralized national process that really authorizes the accreditor and then puts all of those credits on exactly the same basis as a domestically produced course or credit. And we think that that's one of the places where Saudi Arabia can leapfrog the more decentralized systems across the world.
Yeah, and Ted, what we see is, I'll sort of telescope from, in many cases, it is a professor who teaches a course in, say, biostatistics. It's a 5-credit course, and they integrate some of the Coursera material as courseware. And they say, look, my course is worth 5 credits, and that's what it is. And I'm going to use some Coursera content. No problem. That's just purely up to the professor. Then there are some deans who will take a course offer it as a standalone elective, say a course in blockchain. There's no, as you said, kind of, Ted, that sometimes I'm not a professor who can teach blockchain. Well, we need a blockchain elective. What they will do is say this course, they pick the course, this course will be worth 3 credits. It'll be an independent study mentored by one of the professors, but it's done online on Coursera. That's kind of at the dean level. Very often we see at the university level, universities say, anything that has sort of conforms to these quality standards, we will recognize across all schools in our university. In the States, we are now working with states, one in particular, who's looking to ACE credit recommendations. And Ted, I don't know if we've even talked about this. The state accreditor is going to say that all state universities and colleges will recognize this set of content as recommended by ACE at the state level. And then Ted, finally to your point, and somewhat rarely now, but I think clearly the most powerful thing is when you have national policy.
Yes.
That speeds both the scale and I would say also the consistency of quality standards across many institutions more rapidly. So we are seeing different institutions in different regions moving at different paces. I frankly think the strategic direction that Saudi is heading has perhaps holds the greatest promise.
Agreed.
There's also probably a really rich opportunity, and I mentioned this as we were going through the deep dive, a national framework from which all institutions benchmark. And ACE is leading that work to define and describe, for example, what is lower division engineering? What are those competencies and outcomes? And as we're building that framework, though we are decentralized in the US, institutions can look at that and say, this matches directly to where I am in this curriculum or this program. So it's starting to build up transparency and trust in richer ways, which I agree to help push that policy forward.
Very well, Louis, we are at the end of this webinar, but before we close, I would like to give you the mic if you have any final remarks before we close this officially.
I would just like to thank the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for its leadership in this work of recognizing MOOCs for credit and online learning. Thank the panel. It was a really rich conversation, and what I want to honor is the participants on the call who came, and honor them as higher education leaders for the kingdom itself, and helping the kingdom to meet its mission and purposes for growing human capital. It's an honor to have participated and to work with you. And again, thanks to Jeff and and Michelle and Jeff. And thank you, Dr. Rami, and your team at the NELC who have been invaluable in helping us to organize this. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Hey, Louis, before we wrap, I see a number of unanswered questions. It's heartbreaking after a stimulating talk to leave those. I'll just say, if there's any way that we can get those, I will be happy to type up answers that can be emailed back to the participants if you're able to do that. So that's just an offer, from me, certainly out of consideration for the people who've spent the time with us today. It really is an honor to be here, and I'm very grateful for your time.
We'll join you in that. Good. Thanks.
We appreciate that. Once again, Dr. Ted Mitchell, Dr. Paul Leblanc, he left earlier, Mr. Jeff Maggioncalda, Ms. Michele Spires, Mr. Louis Soares, thank you so much, and we look forward to talking to you in the very near future. Thanks again.